Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Bass, and today I will be discussing the ethical concerns of true crime podcasting and its significance. Now, I want to start y'all out with a warning. This is going to be a little bit controversial. There are going to be some takes I have that some may not agree with. But you know what? Let's just agree to disagree, okay? Okay, so moving forward, there is no shortage of ethical concerns regarding true crime podcasting, especially coming from podcasters who are not trained journalists. Let's get started. I can name several of them, but I'm gonna just stick with three, just to make it plain and simple. So number one, it can turn family members or potential witnesses into victims. So I remember listening to a true crime podcast several years ago about a murdered woman whose case went cold for decades. Now, just as a side note, it's been a while since I listened to this podcast, and I do not recall every single detail. And if I know it was by a Canadian podcaster I listened to. So if I went and tried to look for it, I probably wouldn't be able to find it. Or if I did, I'd spend hours doing that. But there's just no YouTube because I remember enough of it. Anyway, moving forward, the police narrowed in on two prime suspects, and the so-called journalists instigated negative stereotypes about the two men, despite the fact they both claimed their innocence. So after several decades of torture for the two men, the DNA from the crime scene proved neither suspect was involved in or even committed the murder. So to make a long story short, the real killer was found and convicted, but not after practically living a normal life, while two innocent men were tortured by citizens of their community because of the damage journalists put on them, or you know, journalists that weren't qualified. This happens more often than we know about. Uh, Both men struggled to maintain a job, and one of them had to live in his mom's basement. If that's just how bad it was for those two. The moral to it, though, is stereotypes and conspiracies can do damage to innocent people. All right, moving along. Number two, it can negatively affect the integrity of the justice system. Now, most murder cases in the United States will not go to trial strictly on circumstantial evidence, like podcasting or what someone said in a podcast. You need more of the hardcore, the concrete evidence like DNA. So, but let's just say there was a murder going to trial with no concrete evidence like DNA, as previously mentioned. Instead, the prosecutors bring in a witness who admitted something on a podcast, narrated by an unqualified host, whether it be condemning evidence that put another person in the crime scene or something. That whole ordeal could affect the decision making of the jury, and in some cases, the judge. So, in a court of law, it is difficult to convict on circumstantial evidence. But convicting a suspect of a witness's testimony in a podcast, guilty or innocent, to me, some may disagree, is unethical. And then number three, it can distract investigators. When dealing with a murder case, time is of the essence. Therefore, investigating what a witness said on a podcast is more times than not going, or it's not going to lead anywhere. It's just going to lead to a total dead end. These witnesses are also not always reliable. Now, here's an example. I heard I've heard it time and time again, that a witness will state a murder case, and investigators take a diver deep into the murder, and it results in a dead end. And it only makes the witness a fool because investigators learn either he or she was biased against potential suspects, or he or she was high on drugs or alcohol. He or she changed their stories every time they were asked to go give their testimony, or he or she straight up lied. I mean, let's be honest, we're all human. We all lie at some point or another. Testimonials are helpful because they might shed some light on information not known by investigators. However, those testimonial interviews need to be conducted by actual detectives on the case, not podcasters looking to stretch their brand. That leads me to the difference between traditional journalism and podcasting. Journalists, already work for a well-known company, and they will still get paid whether or not their interviews with suspects and witnesses leads to a conviction. Here's something controversial that some people might disagree with. Podcasters are always looking for ways to stretch their brand. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. However, when you use podcasting to produce conspiracies on a murder case or have tunnel vision on a suspect in the case, it becomes morally wrong and unethical. So I came up with three code of ethics for true crime podcasts. Number one, no scapegoating witnesses or suspects. Scapegoats are people blamed for an accident done by someone else. Now, we talked about what CBS did to Burke Ramsey in the JonBenet murder case. So what they did to him was basically scapegoating. Burke, along with the rest of the family, had already been cleared as suspects in the murder of the beauty pageant, and the main so forth. The main purpose of these podcasts and documentaries is to potentially gather more crucial information that can lead to an arrest and conviction, not to make conspiracy theories about suspects or witnesses. And that's what CBS did with Burke Ramsey. Number 2, you must get consent of the people who may or may not be involved in the crime. It just seems more polite and respectful to other people and their privacy to ask for their consent to be on a podcast to discuss the case. I mean, you just got to use a little bit of common sense here. After all, everybody involved in the murder case, both suspects and witnesses, they already have a lot on their plate, and logically, it kind of harms their lives. So the goal is to not show up at their front door like the local news station and forcing them to hide with the curtains closed. If you have the consent of them to appear on the podcast, that will also help your podcast stretch their brand, as I mentioned before. That will also earn the trust and respect of your viewers. And then finally, avoid confrontation during the interview about potential evidence. So some would argue this is probably one of the most important aspects of bringing in a witness or a suspect to a podcast. The main goal is to get their side of the story, and they may or may not spew information that was not previously made public by investigators. So let's just say, for example, you are interviewing a suspect in a murder case, and you confront them by the fact that they have no alibi for the time of the murder. Or let's just be like that time I watched Dr. Phil, going back to the Ramsey case. So, Burke, did you straight up, did you kill your younger sister? Okay, when people ask that in a podcast, it's unethical too, because you know what they're going to answer. They're not going to say, yes, I sure did kill my younger sister. How terrible of a person I am. No, they're going to deny it. They're going to deny it all day long. So going forward, that is evidence that could be used against them in the court of law. That's very unethically wrong, and it goes back to when we discussed the importance of avoiding podcasting to create negative stereotypes of individuals or groups involved in a murder case. So to sum this all up, it is best to let the trained journalists do the interviewing and leave true crime podcasts to discuss cases and not to intervene with the justice system. I myself follow a Canadian true podcaster who I cannot praise enough for the job that he's done discussing cases and keeping them ethical. Shout out to Criminally Listed. I am your host, Nick Bass. So long.